Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Armin, Eric, Tiki, Yapsing, Vartan, such a pleasure. I know I'm standing in between lunch and the audience. I'm going to try to make this worth your while. I'm in town from the National University of Singapore, but this really is a homecoming for me, having been born and raised in LA. Our team at NUS, we develop AI systems to address everything from health span and longevity all the way to addressing the diseases of our time. So since I'm back at home and I was born about 20 minutes away from here, I thought I'd start at the beginning here. That's a picture of me from not too long ago, maybe yesterday. We deal with resilience, but I think something I wanted to note is perhaps the most resilient system I've ever come into contact with is actually in my own house. And so this is a shout out to my wife, and I'll talk a little bit more later about why I think she's the most resilient person I know. She did all her degrees here at UCLA, bachelor's, master's, PhD, studying spinal cord injury. She's a 5-time full marathoner. That's me and her. Not too long ago, our first date was just outside the Luskin at Panda Express. Cheap date, I was only 19 at the time. And an amazing mother, and I'll get a little bit into her story in just a little bit. I am the father of Ethan and Emmeline, and they were both born at UCLA, just down this way at Reagan. And these are both photos of them taken. They're having a good time in Singapore right now. Really a privilege to be their father. And I myself, if you don't know, I was also trained at UCLA, all my degrees, and I was also a professor here. And when I joined UCLA, we had the opportunity to really scale up and look at different ways of using data to dynamically treat patients. So one of our earliest studies on the left we did with Ali Zaranpar when he was here, Ron Busatil in transplant. We actually launched that trial about 10 years ago at an event that Eric and team were holding with the X Prize. And that trial eventually led to additional work we do with cancer patients, including a patient here at UCLA, and that work was with Alan Pantuk, Alexandra Dukaki, Ari Beldegrin, who will speak later, with a patient where we dropped the patient's dose 50% to actually increase their efficacy. Imagine that, lowering the dose to boost efficacy. A few years after that, I had the great fortune to bring a second family into my life when I had the chance to join the National University of Singapore. And so in this photo here, NUS is celebrating 120 years old with Yap Singh as well, and our president and the chair of our board. Kids embarking on a new adventure in Singapore as well. And what I did when we moved to Singapore was to further some of the work that we started while we were here on the concept that patients should be viewed as stories and not snapshots. I think when we think about healthcare, we're used to going to see our doctor once a year. They check our bloods. They tell us to drink less, don't smoke, sleep well, eat healthier, and I'll see you next year. But what we learned from our work was that the dynamics, when the biomarkers change within a patient, sometimes the best dose for a patient on a Monday can be very different for that same patient the following Monday, or maybe even a few hours later, or a few days later. And so we developed small data AI models to take that information to dynamically adjust drug doses, right? If we think about oncology, we're very familiar with maximum tolerated dose. And when those doses don't work, we tend to move patients onto other regimens until eventually they hit end of life and they go to hospice care. But what we learned was that by really capturing how patients evolve over time, we could also evolve that treatment alongside them. So not long ago, we launched an RCT in cardiology, and this is just one example. It's still early, but of a patient that was not responding to therapy to address their high blood pressure, but when we lowered the dose for the patient at the right time, we prospectively were able to find them the right blood pressure range. On the right side is an oncology patient with a rare blood cancer, and this patient was unique in the sense that whenever the doctors would give this patient a maximum tolerated dose, it would almost seem like they stopped responding to treatment, which is quite common, right? When patients stop responding, you move them to something else. But when we would capture those dynamics and transiently lower the dose for this patient, they would actually flip from a non-responder to a responder. Right, imagine that. Standard of care dose, no response. But when you drop the dose at the right time, they flip into becoming a responder. And this happened repeatedly for this patient because they kept getting COVID, they're a bit older, and they stop treatment. And when they reinitiate treatment, they always start at the max dose, always thinking that the patient was no longer a responder. What's interesting is for that particular patient, the study was planned for 12 months if we and the patient were fortunate enough. But as of last September, this patient's been with us for now over 4 years, still going strong. In fact, the way our workflows pan out for the patients, it was the patient himself who asked to stay on trial because his quality of life dramatically improved. Us doing all of this work, things were going great. But about 6 months after we moved to Singapore, my wife was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. In fact, the first time I ever met Yap Singh at one of the NIC meetings, my wife was actually still in the hospital recovering from this tumor. When we moved to Singapore, I was really excited for this new adventure for us. The kids were young. We knew Singapore well before we moved. And one day I came home and my wife was laying on the floor, but wide awake, telling me to get an ambulance ASAP. And being so new to Singapore, I didn't even know how to get an ambulance at the time. And we get her to the hospital, and one of my own colleagues, recommended that she be admitted because something wasn't quite right, only to find this tumor. This image doesn't do it justice. It was close to 8 centimeters in her brain. Sometimes bad things happen twice. She recovered from that tumor, but she was diagnosed a few years later with a spine tumor. And what's interesting about my wife is, and some of you have had the chance to meet her, is she's tough. But her PhD happened to also be in spinal cord injury. And so she knows this all too well. She was told going into surgery that because this tumor was much smaller, she'd have a little bit of leg numbness when she woke up. But she actually woke up not being able to feel her right leg at all. And I remember her sitting in a wheelchair, looking up at me in tears, asking me if she would ever walk again. And I told her, I said, "You've been studying this for half your life. You know the answer to that." And lo and behold, she did battle her way back. She's truly tough, and I'll give her a final shout out at the end. When she was diagnosed, of course, being a professor, I'm reading journal papers, right, trying to figure out what things look like, prognosis, etc. And most of the papers I found for her type of tumor talked about survivals of about 2 years. When you move to Singapore and you're ready for an adventure, and then you're confronted overnight with the prospect of not having your partner there after 2 years, this number was in my head day in and day out, 730 days, right? Each day that ticks by, does that bring us closer to 730 days and possibly my wife not being around anymore? And so as my wife was on her battle, I was on my own battle. As she was trying to go this way, I was going this way. Because of her brain tumor, we slept in separate rooms. She had a very messed up sleep schedule. We had 2 very young kids at home. And so what I was doing is I was snacking every night, trying to cope with what was happening. I was waking up every morning, staring up at the ceiling, thinking, is today one less day that I have with Sarah? I think my colleagues didn't really know about this. I was trying to do my best, managing my group at the university. And so I thought to myself, with my wife being sick, 2 young kids, is there potentially a genetic component to all this? I thought to myself, if I keep going south, there's a chance that Kids copy how their parents live. There's a chance that my kids are not going to end up very well also. And so I thought to myself, if I've spent 10 to 15 years studying how people change over time, is there maybe something I can do for myself with our learnings, with our AI, et cetera? So maybe we can think of resilience as a story and not a snapshot as well. An overarching theme in our team is that if indeed resilience, if we as people are stories and not snapshots, we really have this message that hits home in our team, which is that optimums are dynamic, personalization is dynamic, precision needs to be dynamic, they cannot be static, right? And so we started thinking about algorithms that I could use on myself, right, where if I could collect data from me that represents a story, could we use our same Curate platform that we use for blood pressure patients, for oncology patients, to dynamically dose everything from training to fasting to nutrition, et cetera? And with that, we actually launched a trial with me as the test subject. We call it the Delta trial. 2 IRB approvals. The Ministry of Health had to step in and do additional approvals. Understanding if I could collect my own data, dynamically modulate how I eat, how I fast, et cetera, to improve my own health. Not only for my own sake, but for that of my kids, et cetera. But I want to emphasize that Delta is not a before and after photo, right? We deal in data. That's how we work. And so I have my own resilience story as well. Right? We started collecting data on my cardiometabolic resilience, my gut health. We had a super cool panel on the gut as well, to understand how my story changes over time. And what you're looking at here is actually just a small bit of my own gut health. I think I'm one of the most sampled guts in all of Asia, by the way, right? And for those curious who've never done a gut test, it's exactly how you would imagine, right? I had to use the facilities a number of times to get this done. But what was fascinating was understanding just how dynamic my gut is before fasting, after fasting, understanding in the middle which pathways get fortified when I fast. And then very interestingly, being in Asia, understanding how my composition changed over time. On the left side of that bar graph, I'm completely absent of fusobacteria, which I don't think you have to be fully absent of fusobacteria, but understanding how the population looks in Southeast Asia, and then understanding how I was able to leverage some of our Delta dynamic fasting regimens to fortify my own gut health. And then eventually to take all kinds of biomarkers, ranging from my heart to my metabolism, to come up with a new biomarker that looks at resilience dynamically. So this is actually my data. This is an aggregate composition of various inflammatory markers, cardiometabolic markers, gut markers, to understand if I introduce a stress into my system. If you look on the left, initially my body's response to stress was okay. My body wouldn't react too well. And then if you look at my response over time, eventually I started developing and priming my metabolism to be better resilient to stress. Right? And over time, what's fascinating about this is because right now when we look at the longevity field, I think resilience is certainly a popular term that's coming up. But a lot of what we look at in terms of resilience is off of a single data point. From an engineering perspective, you cannot confirm resilience off of one data point. Right? You got to look at the baseline, you got to introduce a stress, and then you have to look at how the system restores itself afterwards. And so we're starting to launch this biomarker to an expanded population because in and of itself, this marker is gamified, right? So people can actually visualize how they are performing and seeing if they can adapt over time. The real goal for me as a part of Delta was to really address my metabolism. The before photo that you saw of me, my blood sugar was going high, which is very common for a lot of people, especially in Asia. Blood pressure was bad, et cetera. I really wanted to focus that trial on de-risking the risk trajectory of my metabolism over time. Right? And I did not realize that starting the Delta trial would put my insulin at a level that rivals my 13-year-old son now, which is super cool. And it's not only one data point, but it's actually a series of data points in the green over there, even under stress, right? We hold the line, my metabolism stays strong. See, for me, resilience is personal, right? I think that I never knew that I would undergo this specific journey from an event that I never expected to happen when I first moved to Singapore. But I wanted to emphasize that, again, resilience is personalized, it's personal, and I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be here today, my wife wouldn't be here today without so many people, many of whom are in the room today. Right? This is really an interesting event for me because I'm born and raised in LA. I trained at UCLA. I was a professor at UCLA. I'm now at the National University of Singapore, both of whom are sponsoring this meeting. And so it's a real privilege to be speaking to all of you and actually to be reconnected with so many friends who played such a profound role in shaping my career. But that's Sarah, by the way. That's Sarah with Yap Singh, Sarah with President Armin and Nuna in Morocco, Vartan. Many of you may not know this, but again, the night that I first met Vartan, when everybody was in town for ADAM Singapore, Sarah was in the hospital for her spine tumor, right? And so being amidst all of you during that time saved me, especially going through this a second time. And if you look at everybody on the right, these include our team members, the doctors who saved her life. Everybody had a role in peeling us off the floor and putting us back on our feet. Everything you've seen today, I have tons of data. We're going to publish that in a couple months. I'm not going to make this a data talk. It's almost lunchtime, so I want to keep everybody awake for a little bit. But I did want to conclude with a question that I often get about the Delta trial is, do I live a life of suffering to stay healthy? And the answer is no, okay? And here's some proof. I really did eat that ice cream, by the way. I didn't take the photo and chuck it in the trash. I really ate the ice cream. Balance matters. And what you're looking at here is a balance of barbells and brain freeze, right? I still work out, made good use of the gym this morning, but I do enjoy my ice cream when I can get it. I want to emphasize this photo with Sarah was taken about 3 days ago. All right, 3 days ago, for Tice, who was collecting the slides, I was delaying constantly so I can get a current photo of Sarah in the gym. She is my inspiration, right? And we grew up here on this campus. She actually is very upset with me that I didn't bring her on this trip. She sends her best. She misses Panda Express. We don't have that in Singapore. But that's where our first date was, so she does have a special place in that for her heart. But that was her just a couple days ago. That's real resilience. All right, so with that, I wanted to thank everybody for having me here today, and thank you so much. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.